Hi, welcome to another episode of the series Before You Buy, where I look at new games, show gameplay, and share my first impressions without any unnecessary hype. Today I'm going to take a look at High on Life 2. The first High on Life was quite a pleasant surprise back in 2022. It wasn't the best shooter of all time, but at a time when a lot of games take themselves way too seriously, this one felt different. It was weird, loud, sometimes even over the top, but it had energy. And even though that style of humor definitely isn't for everyone, when it hit the mark it worked really well. But High on Life 2 is a bit of a different game than I expected. It's still an absurd sci-fi comedy. You still have talking weapons. Things still happen here that wouldn't make any sense in a normal game, but at the same time it's much more of a game than before. It feels more thoughtful, more focused, and more balanced. It's no longer just a series of random jokes and seemingly improvised dialogues. It's still crazy, but this time it has a more solid structure. And I think that's the biggest difference. The first game often felt like a zone of total chaos. The second installment still wants to be funny, but at the same time it builds the world more, gives missions a clearer structure, and much more often tries to make the gameplay stand on its own. This might make it lose a bit of that feeling of complete spontaneous absurdity, but in return, it's a better and more cohesive game. The story picks up directly where the first game left off. Earth was invaded and people were being sold as a drug to an intergalactic cartel. In the sequel, this idea is taken further, and this time a giant pharmaceutical corporation gets involved, turning people into a new legal drug. It's just as absurd and almost as funny as last time. But this time the whole conflict is set up a bit differently, because in order to stand up to it, you have to become an outlaw. In practice though, the core gameplay doesn't really change that much. You still explore semi-open areas, complete missions, hunt targets, and use various talking weapons. A few familiar characters return and new ones are added, so the arsenal is pleasantly more varied from the start than in the first game. But the biggest new feature is the skateboard. And honestly, that was my biggest concern before release, because adding a skateboard to a first-person shooter could turn out really badly. It might seem like an unnecessary gimmick that's only there to make the game look different. But here it works. And not just a little. The skateboard is one of the best things in the whole game. Suddenly movement is a lot more fun. Grinding on rails, bouncing off walls, quickly moving through the environment, combining movement with shooting. All of this gives the game a completely new energy. It reminded me a bit of Sunset Overdrive, where movement itself is part of the fun. And that's exactly what High on Life 2 needed. Thanks to the skateboard, both exploration and combat are better. The arenas are designed so that you play around with movement, not just stand in one place and shoot. When you're low on health, you can quickly skate away, get some distance, and jump back into the fight. And when everything works, it really has a great pace. The shooting itself is still more good than great. It's not Doom, it's not Titanfall, it's not the top of the genre, but it works. Some weapons still feel a bit light, without real impact. The shotgun is still weaker than I'd like, and for a game that's a first-person shooter, that's a bit of a shame. On the other hand, some of the new weapons are better and have more energy. For example, the battle rifle style weapon feels stronger, and overall the arsenal is more balanced than last time. High on Life 2 also handles pacing better. The first game had a very slow start and kept you stuck with one weapon for a long time. Here the game gets going much faster. Right from the start, you get more tools, a more action-packed scene, and even a skateboard fairly early on. You can tell the developers knew what slowed down the pace in the first game and tried to improve it. And they succeeded. But it's still true that High on Life 2 isn't non-stop action. This game still occasionally stops you and lets you watch a long comedic scene. There are still moments where it's not so much about gameplay, but rather about a joke, dialogue, or some absurd situation. The difference is that this time it feels a bit better paced. The world is also more interesting. The main area, Circuit Arcadia, feels more like a real place rather than just a backdrop for random jokes. Of course, it's still total madness. You'll find arcade machines with bizarre games, nonsensical ads, weird characters, absurd items, and a ton of details that are easy to miss. But that's exactly what makes the world feel more alive. A big plus is the side content. Some things may seem like minor details at first glance, but they often turn out to be much bigger segments than I would have expected. For example, there's an escape room or a side quest that starts off as just an ordinary room with a reward, and suddenly it unfolds into something much bigger. And I really enjoyed that. The game knows how to surprise you. Overall, the missions are more inventive than in the first installment. they're not always perfect in terms of gameplay. Not every joke lands, but you can see that the developers really tried to come up with situations you'll remember. For example, the detective segment where you solve a murder isn't just a silly gag with no resolution. The game actually gives you clues and lets you piece things together yourself. And that's exactly the difference between a joke that just slows things down and an absurd segment